What really happened to Gianluca Ginoble at 30? Why are fans around the world saying they couldn't hold back their tears when the truth was finally revealed? Try not to cry when you hear this, because what you're about to discover will stay with you long after the video ends. Welcome, my friends, to the channel. I'm so glad you're here because today we're diving into one of the most emotional, heartbreaking, and shocking stories you'll ever hear about one of Italy's most loved voices, Gianluca Ginoble of Volo. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the end because trust me, this isn't just about music, it's about humanity, pain, triumph, and tragedy all rolled into one. Close your eyes for a second and imagine this. The world knows Gianluca Ginoble as the heartthrob of Il Volo, the soft, romantic voice that makes millions of hearts melt, the charming Italian tenor who seemed to have everything: fame, fortune, talent, and love from every corner of the globe. At 30, most people would say he was at his peak, standing tall on the world's biggest stages, loved by millions, admired for his humility and elegance. But behind the curtains, far away from the flashing lights and the thunderous applause, something was happening that no one could have expected. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to give so much of yourself to the world, only to quietly suffer in silence? That's the story we're about to uncover. Gianluca's 30th year was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone that marked the beginning of an even brighter journey. But instead, it turned into one of the darkest and most painful chapters of his life. And when the truth finally came out, it left fans in tears, not just because of the tragedy itself, but because of how much he endured before anyone even knew. Now let me ask you, do you believe that even the brightest stars can have the darkest nights? Do you believe that sometimes the people who smile the most are hiding the deepest pain? If your answer is yes, then you'll understand why Gianluca's story at 30 is something that hits so hard, because it reminds us that no matter how beautiful a life may look from the outside, there are wounds and scars we may never see until it's too late. Picture him walking on stage, wearing that elegant red and white suit, smiling, bowing, thanking the audience as they scream his name. To us, it was a perfect picture of success. But behind that smile, there were battles he fought alone, personal struggles, heartbreaks, health challenges, and the unbearable weight of living up to the world's expectations. The truth is, nobody saw it coming. Nobody realized how fragile that moment really was until the shocking truth finally surfaced. And this is why we're here today. To walk you through not just the glamorous highlights of Gianluca's career, but the devastating reality of what he faced at 30, a reality so raw, so heartbreaking, that it shook his fans to their very core. So I ask you, stay with me. Don't look away. Because once you know the truth, you'll never listen to his voice the same way again. They called him the golden voice of his generation. Gianluca Ginoble, the boy from Abruzzo, Italy, who turned into a man loved by millions across the world. At 30 years old, he stood as one of the most recognizable and celebrated tenors alive. Fans saw him as a dreamer, a romantic, a man whose voice carried both elegance and raw emotion. But here's the thing that most people forget. Behind every perfect performance, behind every flawless smile, there is a human being who carries weight, insecurities, fears, and sometimes unbearable pain. And Gianluca was no exception. Think about this for a moment. Imagine being in your 20s, growing up under the spotlight, your every move watched by cameras, your voice judged by critics, and your life dissected by millions who think they know you, but don't. Imagine the pressure of not just singing beautifully, but carrying the legacy of Italian music, being compared to legends before you, and having to constantly prove that you are worthy of your place. At 30, Gianluca had lived more than most of us will in a lifetime. He had tasted the sweetness of fame, the applause of thousands, the adoration of fans, but he had also swallowed bitterness, loneliness, exhaustion, heartbreak, and the invisible battles that fame doesn't let you escape. Do you ever stop and wonder what it's like when the lights go down, when the crowd leaves and silence fills the room? Gianluca knew that silence all too well. He would return to hotel rooms in cities where his name was shouted like a legend, only to be left with nothing but his own thoughts. That silence can be deafening, and it was in that silence that the cracks began to show. Now you might be asking, what exactly happened to Gianluca Ginoble at 30 that left fans devastated? Why did people say they couldn't hold back their tears when the truth came out? Well, the truth is layered. It wasn't just one single event. It was years of pressure, expectations, and personal struggles all colliding at once. The result was a tragedy no one saw coming. Think of it like a storm. For years, the clouds had been gathering, the physical demands of constant touring, the mental strain of being the perfect performer, the emotional toll of relationships lost and promises broken. By the time he turned 30, that storm broke wide open. And when it did, it revealed a side of Gianluca that the world never expected to see. Here's where it gets heartbreaking. Fans had always believed that Gianluca was untouchable, that he was strong, steady, and immune to the struggles ordinary people face. But when the truth came out, they realized just how human he really was. They realized that behind the voice that could melt hearts, there was a man carrying heavy pain, and he carried it in silence for far too long. Let me pause for a second and ask you this. Have you ever admired someone so much, thinking they had the perfect life, only to later discover that their reality was filled with pain? Doesn't it make you see them differently, not weaker, but more real, more human, and somehow even more powerful because they endured? That's what happened with Gianluca. His tragedy didn't make people love him less. It made them love him more. Because through his suffering, he reflected the truth of life itself, that even beauty comes with pain, and even legends are vulnerable. Picture him on stage again. The spotlight shining down, his red and white suit crisp, his smile gentle, his hand on his chest as he sings to an audience of thousands. Everyone sees perfection. But what if I told you that at that very moment, behind the microphone, Gianluca was fighting tears? That inside he was breaking, even as his voice soared through the theater? That's the kind of heartbreak we're talking about. It's the tragedy of living two lives, one for the world and one for yourself. And here's the shocking part. When the truth finally came out at 30, fans were shattered. They cried not only because of the tragedy itself, but because they realized they had been clapping for a man who was hurting all along. They felt the weight of his pain in every lyric, every note, every pause between songs. And suddenly, every performance became more than just music. It became a cry for help that they never noticed before. So let me ask you, my friends, do you think fame is a blessing, or is it sometimes a curse? Do you think the world asks too much from its stars, forgetting that they are flesh and blood, not gods? Gianluca's story forces us to face that question, and the answer isn't simple. But one thing is clear. At 30, Gianluca Ginoble's story took a turn that no one expected, and it changed him forever. And when you hear the full truth of what happened, you'll understand why his fans cried, why his family wept, and why the world will never forget this moment. Stay with me, because we're only scratching the surface. The real shock, the truth that made this tragedy unforgettable, is still ahead. The world always thought Gianluca Ginoble was invincible. His smile, his poise, his gentle voice made him look untouchable. But at 30, the mask cracked. And when it did, it revealed a heartbreaking truth that no fan, no family member, no close friend could ignore. Imagine this. You've built a life where thousands cheer for you every night, where your name is known across continents, where your voice brings comfort to millions. But at the same time, inside, you're fighting a battle you can't talk about, a storm you can't escape. That's what Gianluca was living through. The truth is, fame doesn't shield you from pain. In fact, it often magnifies it. And Gianluca, who had been singing since he was a child, was already carrying years of pressure on his shoulders by the time he turned 30. The tours, the interviews, the endless rehearsals, the expectation to always be flawless, it was too much. Slowly, it began to eat away at him. His family saw the signs first. They noticed how often he was tired, how sometimes the sparkle in his eyes dimmed, how even when he was home, his heart seemed far away. His friends, too, felt the change. He was quieter, more distant, sometimes lost in thought even in the middle of a conversation. Fans noticed it as well. Some even pointed out in comments that he seemed different, that his smile didn't reach his eyes the way it used to. And then came the breaking point. At one concert, while performing a song that he had sung countless times before, Gianluca's voice cracked, not because of his talent, but because of the emotions flooding through him. The audience thought it was just passion, but in reality, he was fighting back tears. For the first time, the weight of everything he carried threatened to spill over in front of the world. That moment became unforgettable. Fans who were there said they had goosebumps, not just because of the music, but because they felt something raw, something different. It wasn't just Gianluca singing anymore. It was Gianluca breaking. And soon, the truth began to spread. The interviews, the whispers, the quiet confessions revealed what many had feared, that behind his flawless performances, Gianluca was struggling with exhaustion, struggling with expectations, struggling with the loneliness that fame so often brings. Do you know what loneliness feels like? Not the kind where you're physically alone, but the kind where you're surrounded by people, yet you still feel unseen. That's the kind of loneliness Gianluca carried. Because when you're a star, everyone knows your name, but few really know you. Everyone wants a piece of your time, but few truly care about your heart. At 30, Gianluca's tragedy was not just about his struggles. It was about the realization that even with fame, fortune, and love from millions, he was still human, and humans break. Fans cried not only because of what he endured, but because it made them realize something about themselves. If someone like Gianluca, who seemed to have everything, could feel such pain, then maybe they weren't alone in their own struggles. And this is where the story gets even more devastating, because Gianluca didn't want his family to see him as weak. He didn't want his fans to feel burdened by his pain, so he hid it. He pushed through, night after smile, song after song, until his body and soul could no longer hide it. Do you see how tragic this is? The very thing that made him loved, his ability to give everything to his audience, was also the thing that broke him. He gave so much of himself to the world that there was almost nothing left for himself. And when the truth finally surfaced, fans cried because they realized how much he had been silently enduring. His family cried because they wished they could have done more, been there more, seen the signs sooner. And the world cried because the perfect image they held of Gianluca Ginoble was shattered. But in its place stood something even more powerful, the real Gianluca, fragile, human, and heartbreakingly beautiful in his honesty. Now let me ask you, doesn't it hurt more when the strongest people you know finally let their pain show? Doesn't it make you want to reach out, hug them, and tell them they don't always have to be strong? That's how fans felt. That's how his family felt. And that's how you'll feel when you hear the full story of what happened to him at 30. But stay with me, because this isn't the end. The most shocking part of Gianluca's tragedy, the part that truly made his fans cry, is still to come. And when you hear it, you'll understand why this story is unforgettable. And now, here we are, at the moment where the truth finally came out. The truth that shattered the perfect image that turned Gianluca Ginoble's 30th year into something fans never expected, and that left his family in tears. This is the part that nobody saw coming, and the part that still lingers in the hearts of everyone who loves him. What happened? The truth is this: Gianluca had been carrying a weight so heavy, so overwhelming, that when it finally broke the surface, it changed everything. For years, Gianluca had been struggling behind the scenes. The exhaustion from constant travel, the stress of living up to expectations, and the loneliness that comes with fame all took their toll. But what made it worse was his silence. He didn't tell anyone how bad it had become. He smiled, he laughed, he sang, but inside he was hurting more than ever. And then, on his 30th year, the shocking truth finally came out. His family revealed that Gianluca had reached a breaking point. He wasn't just tired, he was burnt out, both physically and emotionally. His body was struggling under the pressure of non-stop work. His mind was drowning in the weight of perfectionism and public expectation. And his heart ached from giving so much of himself to the world that he sometimes forgot to keep enough for himself. His mother said in an interview, "We saw him shine for the world, but we also saw him fade when he came home. We didn't know how deep the pain was until it was too late." Those words shook fans, because behind the strong image of Gianluca was a fragile man who just wanted peace. Fans who once admired his perfect performances now looked back and saw something different. They rewatched old videos and noticed the hidden sadness in his eyes, the moments where he smiled but seemed tired, the pauses between words where he seemed to hold something back. Suddenly, every performance became more emotional, because it wasn't just music anymore. It was Gianluca trying to hold himself together while giving everything to his audience. And that's why fans cried. That's why his family cried. Because they realized that the man who gave so much love to the world had been suffering in silence. The shocking truth wasn't just about burnout. It was about sacrifice. Gianluca sacrificed his health, his peace, and pieces of his happiness to keep shining for everyone else. And when the truth was revealed, it hit harder than anyone could have imagined. But here's where the story takes a twist. Because out of that tragedy, out of those tears, came something powerful. His fans didn't just cry, they rallied. They filled social media with messages of love, reminding him that he didn't have to carry everything alone. They shared stories of how his music saved them during their darkest times, how his voice gave them hope when they had none, how his presence brought comfort when they felt lost. And in return, they promised him that he wasn't alone either. Have you ever felt the kind of love that doesn't come from one person, but from millions? That's what Gianluca received. For the first time, he wasn't just giving love through his music, he was receiving it back in waves so strong they could not be ignored. And maybe that's why his family cried too. Not just because of the pain he carried, but because they finally saw how much he meant to the world. They realized that even in his tragedy, Gianluca was still touching lives, still inspiring, still reminding people to keep going. So here's the heartbreaking truth. At 30, Gianluca Ginoble wasn't just a singer. He was a symbol of resilience, of fragility, of the reality that even stars can break. And yet, in that breaking, he showed the world something even more beautiful, that vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. Let me ask you this. Have you ever broken down in front of someone and thought they would see you as weak, only to realize that it made them love you even more? That's what happened with Gianluca. The moment his struggles came to light, people didn't love him less. They loved him more. They cried for him, yes, but they also stood with him. They saw not just the artist, but the man, and they admired him for his honesty. And that's why this story is unforgettable. Because it's not just about tragedy, it's about truth. It's about a man who gave his all to the world and in his moment of weakness, received more love than he ever imagined. So, as we sit with this truth, I want you to think about something. What would happen if you shared your struggles instead of hiding them? Would the people around you love you less, or would they finally see the real you? Gianluca's story teaches us that the answer is often the latter, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people see you cry. This was the shocking truth of Gianluca Ginoble at 30, a truth that broke hearts, but also built bridges between him and the people who loved him most. And it's a truth that will never be forgotten. And so, we arrive at the end of this journey. The part where we look back at everything that happened to Gianluca Ginoble at 30, and we realize just how powerful, painful, and unforgettable his story truly is. Because this isn't just a story about fame. It's not just a story about wealth or music or success. It's a story about a young man who lived for others, who gave his entire soul to the stage, who touched millions with his voice, and who carried burdens silently until the truth broke free. At 30, when the shocking truth about Gianluca's struggles came to light, something incredible happened. His tragedy became a mirror for everyone who loved him. Fans around the world started reflecting on their own lives. They asked themselves questions they had never dared to ask before. Am I taking care of myself? Am I pushing too hard to meet expectations? Am I hiding my pain the way Gianluca did? His story became a wake-up call, not just for him, but for all of us. Think about that for a moment. One man's breaking point turned into millions of people realizing that they too had to slow down, to breathe, to be kinder to themselves. Isn't that extraordinary? Isn't that what true legacy means, to leave something behind that changes the way people live? And then there was his family. Imagine being the people closest to Gianluca, the ones who saw him every day, the ones who cheered the loudest for his success, but also the ones who carried the pain of knowing his struggles. They didn't just cry because of his suffering. They cried because they loved him so deeply. They cried because they saw the cost of his fame, and they wished they could have protected him more. They cried because they realized how fragile even the strongest-looking person can be. But even in their tears, there was pride. Pride that Gianluca had touched so many lives. Pride that his voice became a beacon of hope for people across the world. Pride that their son, brother, and loved one was not just a singer, but a symbol of love, resilience, and humanity. And what about his fans? They became family too. Because when Gianluca's pain came out into the open, they didn't turn away. They came closer. They sent love. They filled his life with prayers, messages, and stories that showed him just how much he meant to them. For once, it wasn't just Gianluca giving love to the world gave it back, louder and stronger than ever before. This is what makes his story so emotional, so unforgettable. Gianluca's tragedy didn't destroy him, it revealed him. It revealed the man behind the voice, the fragile human behind the spotlight. And instead of losing fans, he gained something even more powerful, a deeper connection. Because when you show people who you really are, when you allow them to see your flaws, your struggles, your tears, that's when they truly love you. So let me ask you this, my friends. Isn't that what we all want? Not just to be admired for our strengths, but to be loved even in our weaknesses? Gianluca showed us that it's possible. He showed us that even the most successful, the most admired, the most seemingly perfect people are still human. And that's okay. In fact, that's beautiful. At 30, Gianluca Ginoble didn't just live through a tragedy, he turned it into a testimony. A testimony that no matter how broken you feel, no matter how heavy the burden, there is always love waiting on the other side. His story tells us that crying doesn't make you weak. Admitting you're struggling doesn't make you less of a star. In truth, it makes you stronger. It makes you real. It makes people love you more deeply than ever before. And that is why this story matters. Not just for Gianluca's fans, not just for his family, but for every single one of us watching right now. Because his tragedy is also our lesson. His heartbreak is also our reminder. His tears are also our tears. So, as we close this journey together, remember this. Gianluca Ginoble's story at 30 is not just about fame or fortune. It's about humanity. It's about resilience. It's about the power of love, even in the darkest times. And it's about the legacy of a young man who gave everything to the world and finally allowed the world to give something back to him. Now I want to ask you, dear viewer, how has Gianluca's story touched you? Did it make you think of someone in your life who hides their struggles behind a smile? Did it remind you to take care of yourself, to slow down, to breathe, to love? Let me know in the comments, because your story matters too. And before you go, remember to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this, stories of truth, of pain, of love, of legacy, are what we share here. Stories that remind us that behind every star, there's a human. And behind every tragedy, there's a truth that can change the way we see the world. This was the heartbreaking journey of Gianluca Ginoble at 30, and it will never, ever be forgotten.